Cool. Apparently it's recording.
Nice.
I don't know what it's recording, but it's recording.
Can we edit out?
Yeah, I'm sure we can edit. Right, I'm going to admit everybody, all right?
Good, yep.
Good luck.
Thanks.
Perfect. Oh, people are coming and going. We'll just give everybody a couple of minutes because there's still people joining at the second. And then we'll make a start. Oh. That's everybody. Oh, no, there's one more. Excellent. Okay, there's lots of people trying to sort of come through, but that's everybody who at least at the moment is here. So everybody's joining in. If people want to join in a bit, we can always let them in, but I don't think you guys should have to wait. So good evening. As I say, that's somebody else decides to come. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our first webinar. Hopefully this will be sort of a bit of a whistle-stop tour of everything you'll need to know for your medical application. We're going to go through everything. So just to say, I've muted everybody for the moment, more just so that we don't have that jumping of the screen sort of every time somebody scratches or taps or something like that. If at any point you kind of want to ask any questions or anything like that, feel free to either type them in the chat or unmute yourself and just ask a question, but it just means that we don't get that sort of jumping around. But people are still just trying to join in just before I say anything too important. Cool. I'm assuming that everybody can hear me and can see the screen, the PowerPoint screen that we're going to be talking from, because as much as I'll be chatting away, the actual information's over there and not coming from me. Perfect. Okie dokie. So we'll just start off by a few introductions and then we'll get started. So I'll let Sharon introduce himself first while I admit these last few people. You're muted.
It's been a mixture.
Sharon, sorry, you were muted.
Ah, perfect. Hi again. So I'm Sharon. Me and Travis currently work together on ITU. We're both junior doctors. I've had a significant experience trying to get people into medicine. I've also been an interviewer for medical school, and we've been running sessions like this for the past 5-6 years. So what we're going to do today is give you a whistle tour of things you can do to strengthen your application. Whilst Travis is letting a few more people in, this will probably be between 45 minutes to an hour, and at the end we'll give you an opportunity, so you can ask questions throughout as well through the chat, or at the end there'll also be a Q&A, and we've already got some questions that we've put in there that you can submit more if you like. Brilliant. I'll hand over back to Travis.
Excellent. Yeah, so like Sharon said, my name's Travis. I work with Sharon in intensive care, and basically exactly like Sharon was saying, over the years we found there's lots of basically like cash grabs out there where people who are generally junior medical students start setting up these things trying to sort of tutor people and help them along, but realistically their only experience is from getting themselves and maybe a friend or family member into medical school. And what we were finding is that we end up then picking up the pieces, so to speak, and sort of seeing these people down the line where they've spent a lot of money and not really gained that much from it. And so that's where we kind of set our medical missions from, was to sort of help people initially getting into medical school. And then since setting up, we've actually spent a lot of time helping people pass medical school. So whether it's getting the right foundation job and preparing to be a doctor, whether it's applying for sort of jobs after that, this is kind of what we've been doing over the last couple of years, helping people at every step of the way. And hopefully because of that, we kind of have got down a little bit more than others exactly what it takes and exactly what you need to kind of get that place at medical school. So today's kind of a bit more of an overview, but then hopefully over the next couple of weeks we can help sort of everything work its way up and make sure that we've kind of got the application process down. If you guys have got any questions, so we know how difficult it can be, basically just to get to the bottom of that. Excellent. So as I say, we've kind of talked about this a little bit. Our vision is to help you get into medical school. We know that there's lots of people out there who want to be doctors and dentists and things like that, and who basically aren't able because it's so competitive, and all these kind of barriers have been put in the way with the entrance exams, with the interviews and the personal statement and the work experience. And if you don't kind of have your head around everything and choose the right A-levels and do the right things and write about them in the right way, you just basically won't get the place. And that means that people who would make good doctors don't get places at medical school. And that for us was really wrong, because we know, especially at the moment, we know that we need more doctors, we need more healthcare professionals, we need people who are committed to working in healthcare. And ultimately, those people aren't always getting in for the wrong reasons, because you don't know how to get the work experience, or you don't know how to approach the UCAT or the BMAT, which are very different to GCSEs and A-levels. And so that's what and why we kind of came about and what we're trying to do.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to go through a few different things. So we're going to start off with early days. The early day stuff is about GCSEs, A-levels. So we've got a few people today who have joined who are in year 9, although most people are doing year 10 or year 11. We're then going to talk about showing commitment to medicine, a few things you can do, and some of the things that people miss out on. These are opportunities that you can work on at the moment. We'll then go on to choosing a medical school, entrance exams, also a few strategic things you can do to strengthen the application, and then the personal statement and the all-important interview. So we're going to start off with the GCSE bit initially. So a lot of people ask about what should you do and which GCSE should you choose. So there's some subjects that are mandatory, and these mandatory subjects tend to include English, maths, science, and usually a humanities or a language, but this varies per which school you're in. In terms of the ones you choose yourself, some colleges or schools will give you the option of saying, would you like to choose an additional science subject or further maths? So we'd normally recommend starting off with science is to do the maximum number that you can. So for example, your school might offer you double science or triple science. We'd recommend triple science, not because it's just more science, but actually, one, it strengthens the application. And number two, which is very important, is when you go on to A-levels, which we'll talk about next, you usually need biology and chemistry. The more science that you've done, the stronger your understanding will be. And usually it makes it slightly easier for your A-level, which is quite comprehensive. There's a lot of understanding which is required. There's also certain subjects which are deemed to be more, we call them high scoring subjects. But what we mean by that is there's some subjects which are called soft subjects, and there's some subjects which are a bit harder or seen by universities as harder subjects. So some of the ones which are not counted include ones like applied ICT, applied science. Sometimes universities will exclude in other subjects like BTECs or diplomas. So it is important that when you're applying, if you're at that early stage where you haven't done your GCSEs or you're choosing your GCSEs, that you have a think about what's available and you look at a few university specifications. Commonly, the medical school websites will tell you which subjects they exclude. The other thing is choose subjects which are relevant. So we've mentioned about choosing the relevant sciences. In terms of the GCSE examples, so for example, Cambridge University, they don't even look at your GCSEs. And this is why we've done this as an example. Many medical schools don't look at them at all, whereas others use them as part of the entrance requirements. They use them as part of the scoring system. So for example, if you look at Bristol, they give you, they want at least a A or a grade 7 in maths, and they want a 6 in English. Other universities used to rank it and correlate. So for example, what Oxford have done in the past is they've looked at the percentage of A stars that you have at GCSE, so percentage of 8 and 9s, and then correlated that against different things to work out whether they want to even get you to interview stage. So that varies. And again, that varies per university. So the next thing we're going to go on to is about choosing your A levels. And we know a lot of people already have done this. But in terms of choosing your A levels, most universities would like you to have either biology and chemistry. It usually makes life easier to have both, although there are certain universities where you can just have one. And then the third subject, which we've again labeled as a high scoring one, again, there's a lot of exclusions that universities have. These exclusions are stuff like some universities that won't take psychology, some of them won't take applied ICT or applied subjects. General studies is usually excluded, critical thinking excluded. But during your A levels, there are also additional things that you can do to try and boost your application. So for example, one of the things which we've been doing tutoring on and people commonly ask about is the extended project. A lot of colleges offer that. And again, that's something you can do whilst doing your A levels. And it is counted and it's looked as an additional thing. It also helps for your personal statement, and it's something which really boosts your application. And it gives you an opportunity to talk about something at your interview. A lot of people tend to go for the extended project, and it doesn't necessarily have to be medicine related. It could be related to anything, but more and more people are choosing subjects that are either ethical scenarios or artificial intelligence, or the use of robots in medicine, or lots of different things. And there is a wide scope there of things you can choose. And in terms of the actual grades as well, they vary. But there's just a snapshot here. So for example, Imperial, they want an A star AA as a minimum, whereas Plymouth, they have more of a spectrum, and it says A star AA to AAB. And again, there's certain subjects that they all want you to have. So it's very important to look at the individual requirements to be able to go through them prior to choosing, if you're still at that stage where you haven't chosen your A levels. For those who have already chosen your A levels, which will probably be the majority of you, it's fine. Just work hard, continue working hard, and the main aim should be to get as high as marks as you can. Minimum A's, ideally, if you can in anything, A stars. But it is competitive and it is hard. But that's why the offers are always, usually most medical schools are saying AAA. There's also the factor that when you get to the stage where you've either had a conditional offer, the day that offers come in, a lot of people unfortunately do miss their offers. But what usually happens at that stage is that we give you, or the medical schools usually give you alternatives sometimes. So if another person has missed their offer, we then recommend that you ring the university and say, these are the grades I've actually got. Is there anything you can do? And it has happened before. We know colleagues and students we've tutored who've actually just missed their grade by one. So they might have got AAB instead of AAA. And the medical school has agreed to take them on. So it's always worth asking the question if you don't hit the required mark. And then the other thing we're going to go on to is commitment to medicine. And again, this is very important. There's lots of different things you can do to show commitment. And this is where everyone, regardless of what stage you're at, can start to do things from now. So there's voluntary work. One of the examples, something which both me, Travis, and Luke have done as well, that's volunteering. So for example, volunteering for St. John Ambulance, or volunteering for charities or local organizations. They don't have to be medicine related. They can be related to different things. It's just about showing that you've got that community spirit, there's a team spirit, and you're volunteering in the community. There's also a emphasis on applicants being able to show commitment. So the bottom two extracts are actually copied from medical schools. And it can be difficult to get medical work experience. So students commonly go to care homes. We've had students who work as volunteers in their local hospital. And most hospitals will have schemes like this. The other things that you can do is the extended project that we've mentioned. There's also the level of, when it comes to commitment to medicine, you have to be very driven. And one of the things that we look for when reviewing personal statements is, have you shown that you've, one, got something which is quite unique and specialist, pushing yourself forward to discriminate from other candidates? And actually, if you've taken up an extra curricular activity, it's very important to show how you've exceeded what anyone else might do, or how you've made that very personalized. So for example, if you've done the Duke of Edinburgh, what have you been able to do within that you can reflect on? So it's very important to, when you show your commitment, to also show that as a doctor, you've got leadership skills, you've got teamwork skills. So anything that you've done, you can use it as a commitment to medicine. That's important to try and utilize these opportunities. So I'm just going to hand you over to Travis.
Perfect. So you can see already it's becoming a very wishy-washy thing about what you've done, who counts what places take which. And this is something really, really unique, I think, to medicine, is that you think when you're applying to medicine that everybody wants exactly the same things, but actually they don't at all. And every medical school kind of thinks that they've got the right way of admitting people. So, you know, Oxford and Cambridge still think it's the very old school arguing with you for 4 interviews, whereas Sheffield these days like to send you the interview questions and make sure that you're as prepared as possible. Whereas, you know, some places like lots of work experience, some places like no work at all, you know, different amounts of work experience, and what they count is different. Some places look at your GCSEs, some places don't. And having all these things clear in your head is really important to make sure that you're actually applying to the best place for you. Know what they're like, know the competition, know whether people are likely to apply there who look better than you in terms of what they look like, or whether or not you look like a strong candidate to what they look like. Because everything is particular to each university. And I think that's something that lots of people who I've and Sharon have looked at over the years haven't quite appreciated, that your application might get rejected from one university and then you might get an offer from another university. And they're completely different bearing on just wherever you've applied. So then we move on to these lovely admissions tests, which I think are one of the biggest banes of people's lives when they come to apply for medicine, because they are almost completely different to what you have done in the past. So most people, I think, will be looking at the UCAT, which used to be the UKCAT, which is an aptitude test. It's very similar to what's used in some banks. And the idea is that there's lots of correlations. And in a minute, we'll go through the different sections and you'll see the correlations there. But actually, when you come to sit it, it just becomes a hurdle and something you have to kind of revise for, because it's very different to what you actually do. Then there's the BMAT, which is used by a much smaller amount of universities, but they do include Oxford and Cambridge. So if you're thinking of applying there, it's something you'll have to do. There's 2 sittings for it. One of them, you don't get your results before you apply. However, I know that if you're looking at applying to Oxford, you have to sit the later one, at least you did last year. And so that's something to bear in mind as well. There is some overlap between the UCAT and the BMAT. However, they're not that big. So if you are thinking of sitting both, you are probably going to have to do a lot of work for both separately. So that's something else to bear in mind. Look at which universities suit your type of application. Look at which entrance exams they use. And maybe if you've got 7 or 8 that you're thinking of and 6 of them use the UCAT, 1 uses the BMAT, that's something to take in mind. You might think I've got the time to learn about both, and that's fine. You also might think, actually, I'd rather focus just on the UCAT or just on the BMAT. The GAMSAT is a whole other beast. That's for graduates who are looking to apply for medicine, and specifically usually graduates that don't have a science background. So universities such as Warwick will take university graduates with any degree. However, you do have to sit this thing called the GAMSAT, which is a 6 to 8 hour exam, depending if you count the breaks and things, and basically goes through almost everything. If anybody's thinking of applying with the GAMSAT, we're not really going to touch on that today, but drop us a line, let us know, and we can certainly help you with how to prepare for the GAMSAT, because it is quite the undertaking, to say the least. So let's talk about the UCAT. So like you say, it used to be called the UKCAT. It's now the University Clinical Aptitude. It used to be the United Kingdom. They basically want to use the same exam across the world, so they changed the name. This is the first year ever, as I'm sure you're all aware, that you're going to be able to sit it online as opposed to in a test centre. So you used to always do it in the same place that you do your driving theory test, and you go to this sort of age-old computer, sit down and sit the exam. Now, what the online bit is going to look like, we don't know yet, in all honesty. They announced just on the Monday, on the 1st, that they were going to allow this online sitting. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but as soon as we do, we'll obviously be keeping everyone posted. They say that they use artificial intelligence. I don't know what that means, but I assume it'll be some way of like finding out if people are cheating. Whether or not you have to log into like a fixed environment on your computer. I know when I was at Imperial, we sat some of our exams on iPads, and they used to have to issue iPads to us for the exam, and then they got picked up at the end, so you couldn't have any sort of application. So how they'll do it on your own computer, we're not sure yet. But it's worth knowing that it does cost money to do the UCAT, depending on when you sit it. There is a bursary for that, and there's also a special education needs version. What I would say is just double check that if you're going to apply for the UKCAT SEN, that you have whatever evidence that they need to hand, because if you can't, you can book it without the evidence, but if you can't produce that evidence, you then have your UCAT invalidated. And I know I've known people who were very well deserving of the SEN version, but couldn't get hold of the evidence in time and then had their entry invalidated. And that was just really heartbreaking because they had a really good score, they were really excited to apply, and then couldn't. So you've got these 5 sections, 4 of which are scored in one way, and then they've got the situational judgment on the end. So verbal reasoning, very quickly, is 44 questions in 22 minutes. And straight away, you're going to start to notice that the questions don't quite tie up to the time. This is a very time-pressured examination. So the idea is that you critically evaluate information. You get passages of text, and you have to kind of pull information out of them quite quickly. Decision making is, again, looking to make decisions and judgments from information given. It's usually like deciphering codes and things like that. And again, 29 questions in 31 minutes. So you've still only got about a minute a question. Quantitative reasoning is maths. In short, they have to evaluate numerical information. 36 questions in 24 minutes. So again, not even a minute a question. And then probably the one that's most famous and the one I'm sure most people dread, I know I certainly did, is the abstract reasoning, where it's supposed to promote this convergent and divergent thinking. That's what UCAT kind of advertise it as. It's effectively looking for patterns and trying to see how things fit into patterns. And I know it's the one that most people find really, really difficult. Not just because if you look there, 55 questions in 13 minutes is time pressured, and it's obviously quite difficult, just because it's a way of people don't typically think, certainly people coming from a science background. As I said, I know it's the one that I struggled with the most when I did it all those years ago. And then finally, you got this situational judgment. And back when I did my UCAT, or what is now UCAT, this didn't really count for anything. Like, it was there, you got a score or a banding, but nobody really looked at it, in all honesty. Now, every year, it seems to be like more promoted, and they're taking it into account more. It's scoring you points, it's giving you an extra ranking. And what it basically does is it takes you through different scenarios, usually related to medicine or other scenarios in life. But it means that you want to see how you would react based on how a panel of experts would react, and whether things are appropriate or not appropriate. And this is really interesting because right at the end of medical school, you actually sit another situational judgment test. And this one is the complete similarity, but it determines where you basically go as a junior doctor. So 50% of your grades are made up by how you're doing all your exams, whether you've got any publications, all these other things make up 50%. And the other 50% is just made up by a situational judgment test. So this is probably the most relatable thing to your life in medicine, because you'll literally sit a similar exam right at the end of medical school, and it will determine 50% of where you get placed in the country as a junior doctor. Perfect. So you go, you sit the UCAT, and each score is between 300 and 900. And what they basically do is they get a load of people to sit the exam before it starts. They see how they do. They find kind of the average of all of those. And then they see how you compare to the average. And that's how they kind of calculate your score. And the SJT is split into bands. So you're all obviously aiming for band 1. And about 17% of people get band 1, and then the middle is band 2 and band 3, where you kind of get most things or slightly less than most. And then band 4 is kind of very different views to the judges panel, and hopefully, you know, nobody's going to achieve a band 4. So if the eagle-eyed among you would have noticed, these are the averages for the last 3 years for UCAT score. So it gives you an idea for each section what the average is. Now, again, this is where it's interesting, because some places will look at your overall score. So you'll hear lots of people talk about 2,800 as your UCAT score, or 2,500, 3,200. That's fine. That's when you've added all 4 sections together. Some places will count your overall score. Some will look at your lowest single area. So if you get 700, 720, 750, and 620, there's some places that would count that as a good score when they add them together. There's some places that would say your score is 620. And so again, it just shows how you have to be so careful where you apply to. So here was some interesting, so these are the minimum scores and the minimum averages for each place of different medical schools to give you an idea of what you're aiming for. So where we were saying about 2,800, that will get you into most medical schools on this list, apart from the graduate program at Newcastle, just to give you an idea of the different schools that people are looking for the UCAT. Perfect. So that's kind of an overview of the UCAT. If you got any questions about it, pop them in the chat. We'll make sure to answer them at the end. You could go on and on and on about the UCAT. It is a whole beast of itself, but I'll hand you back to Sharon to have a look at the BMAT.
So as Travis has discussed, most the universities tend to go for UCAT, and there are selected universities which want BMAT. The BMAT is a tough exam. It's definitely, it needs a lot of preparation, and you need to be able to cover a wide spectrum. And this is where having the triple science is sometimes very valuable. Having had a bit of extra statistics is quite good, and having a wider spectrum can be really good. So to start with, section 1 is a section where you get different questions. There's 32 questions and there's 60 minutes. This section is probably the most similar to the UCAT sections, where you're looking at quantitative analysis. There's a bit of maths in there. There's a bit of data interpretation. And again, it is quite time pressured. So it's about being able to interpret charts, interpret shapes, like the abstract reasoning section in the UCAT. And you have to be able to do that in a time pressured manner. So that's the main thing for section 1. Section 2 is where we talk about, there's the scientific knowledge part. So that's split into different sections. Again, there's biology, physics, chemistry, and this is the part where sometimes a lot of coaching is required. So section 1 is more of the aptitude test. It's similar to what's used to get into jobs. Banking jobs use it. And the BMAT is also used by different courses. It's not just something used by medicine. But if you look at the section 2, that's quite specific. So you have to know some of the sciences, you have to know some maths content. And this is where, if there are gaps in your knowledge, that's where you can cover them to look at different areas. There's also a big, wide selection of past papers and questions on their website, which is really useful, because that lets you look through them and you can then get a good example of where your knowledge is and what topics tend to come up. And section 3 is essentially you choose one topic out of 3 or 4. So, and then you write an essay on that topic, and we'll go into how that's graded in a minute. In terms of some of the questions we're getting, we will go into those questions at the end in terms of when's the best time to prepare. I've also had a private question about when you get the results for BMAT. In terms of BMAT results, the September sitting this year has been cancelled. So that's official. It's on the BMAT website. There's no September sitting this year. So next sitting will be in November. In terms of the results, we'll give you the dates at the end, but what tends to happen is that the sitting's on the 4th of November, and the results will be released on the 27th of November. And that's why we usually encourage people to try and sit the BMAT at the first sitting or early as possible, so you can try and get your scores. Whereas in the second one, the scores will directly be sent to your university or where you've applied. So we're just going to move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about the different sections. So section 1 of the BMAT. So we're just going to move on to it. Travis will just click us on to section 1. So section 1 of the BMAT, basically it's marked between 1 and 9. So what happens is for sections 1 and 2, that each question or each scenario that they do, they mark it up until 1. What they then do is they scale that score. So similar to in the UCAT, where they give you a score of between 300 and 900. For the BMAT, they give you a score which is between 1 and 9. 1 is the lowest score and 9 is the highest score. And in a minute, we're going to show you what makes up a good score. In terms of most BMAT test takers, it's roughly around about 4.5 to 5. The best candidates will get above 6, and that's where we aim for all our candidates to be. That's where we want you guys to be, and that's a good score. It's a very decent score, and we'll get you into most the medical schools for the selection criteria. And a few, or right at the top, some people will get above 7. And again, that is very, very hard to achieve, but it is what you want to aim for. So if you look at this graph, this shows you the distribution of everyone who sat the BMAT section 1 in 2019. And as you can see, there's lots and lots of people who are scoring between 3.5 and 5.5. But where we want you to be is where we've highlighted the area. So we want you to be ideally achieving above 6. So that's the range we'd want you to be. And the benefit of that is it gives you a lot of flexibility, and it allows you to be in the top range of candidates. It helps the university discriminate. And sometimes what happens is that you might actually get to your interview and there's a tiebreaker. And if there is a tiebreaker, what usually happens is they'll go back and have a look and reflect on where is it that we can find the difference. And sometimes it will come down to UCAT score and the BMAT score, and that can happen. So that's section 1, and that's the aptitude section bit. So section 2, this is the scientific bit where you tend to get a bit more biology, chemistry, and physics. And again, you can see the skewing on here shows that it's probably slightly harder. or at least in terms of the marks, what you can see is people tend to score a bit lower. So it's between 3 and 4.5. And again, for this section, we'd say you want to be competitive. You want to be scoring at least 5.5. So above 5.5 in section 2 would be a good score. And again, it's about making sure that you're able to cover a lot of the content, and it is about practice. So I think the main thing for the BMAT is it's about getting a lot of different practice, making sure you've covered a wide range of subjects. And that's why in section 2 in particular, it's important that if you are going to do the BMAT, you've got a relatively strong science base. One of the questions we've also had is about preparation for the BMAT. If you've got strong sciences and you've done biology, chemistry, and maths at A level, or you've done the 3 sciences and maths, then you'd probably be looking to prepare for 4 weeks to 6 weeks. But actually, if you've not done physics, or if you've not done biology or chemistry, then you probably want to be looking at least 2 to 3 months of intense revision, because you will have gaps in your knowledge and you need to consolidate them. In terms of the UCAT, so section 1 in particular, there's a bit of overlap. So for section 1, you probably need less preparation, because most students who apply, unless you're applying to all BMAT universities, you will have covered some of the section 1 stuff already. But certainly for section 2, you need a lot more preparation. And again, the blue shaded area in the graph, it shows you where we'd want you to aim. So above 5.5. And as you can see, not many people tend to score above 6, but if you can get that, that's very good. So just going to move on to section 3 now. So section 3 is a section where you get a question on writing an essay, and we'll show you some graphs for section 3 as well. And essentially, so what you can see here is for section 3, the way it's assessed, there's 2 different categories that you get assessed on. So you get assessed on the quality of your content. So this is scored between 0 and 5. And there's descriptors on the website of how you score these different marks. But again, it is very hard to score above 3.5 or 4.5. That's where we want you to score. And it's all about practice. So you get given different essays, and you have to then explain what the essays show, or you have to argue different cases. And we have got a lot of examples, and we will have webinars coming up, which will give you the dates at the end, where we'll be going through some examples just to give you a bit of a flavour for what comes up. In terms of the second part of section 3 that's graded, it's the quality of English. So most UK graduates would, as you can see by the graph, over 70% of people score A, and that has to be a bare minimum. So we think most candidates, you should be scoring A, and again, that's all down to practice as well. So we'd make sure that you get adequate practice, and you need to make sure that you've done lots and lots of essays. Unfortunately, there is a bit of a bias. So in some schools, some universities, and some applicants who've got a background from private schools, they're slightly more used to writing essays because they've had to do a bit more of that. But it's very achievable. And if you are going to be doing the BMAT, it's very, very important to be brushing up your skills on essay writing and getting good at that. So the next section is on the personal statement, and Travis is going to lead you through this.
Perfect. So I apologize, I was trying to answer some of these questions and look at the slides to move them on for Sharon at the same time. So I apologize if I was a bit slow moving things on there. I will come back. I've been trying to type some of the UCAT question answers that came up while I was talking. I apologize, I can't multitask, so I wasn't able to look at questions and talk at the same time. But I will come back to them all at the end. So if I haven't typed your reply, I will come back to the questions at the end. But let's talk about a personal statement. So I think this is a really, really hard thing to do. And I don't think it gets any easier as you move on in life. The idea of writing about yourself in a positive way is really hard. And then to kind of, you start working on potentially a medical application sometime around GCSE to A level. You've got 2, 3, 4 years of work that you're trying to condense into this one A4 page. It's really, really hard because to you, everything is important. Everything is kind of you want to get across. And actually, it's about highlighting exactly what is important to the interviewer and not necessarily what might be important to you. What they're looking for isn't that you've shadowed the top paediatrician at Great Ormond Street and that you've shadowed the top cardiothoracic surgeon at the Brompton or anything like that. They're looking for the fact that you as a person are well-rounded, smart, and prepared enough to come to medical school. That's what they want to know. When we sit on panels, and I've interviewed for Imperial, Sharon's interviewed for Newcastle and a few other medical schools, we used to sit there and basically try and identify if we give you a place at medical school, are you going to cope? And by what I mean by cope is not just, are you going to cope emotionally, but also, are you going to cope with the work pressure? Are you going to cope with the amount of learning you have to do? Are you going to cope with the amount of knowledge you have to undertake? Are you going to develop into a well-rounded person? Are you socially and everything like that all ready to come to medical school and to start this journey? Because the real worry is that you'll get 3, 4, 5 years down the line and change your mind. And that's a place then that could have gone to somebody else. And that's what the whole process is built about. So in this one A4 page, you're trying to capture exactly why you want to go to medical school. Now, something that might come up, and we always get asked a lot, is do you need this sort of like heart-changing story to come to medical school? You know, do you have to save the life of every person in your village just because that gave you an insight into what it'd be like to save people's lives for the whole of your life in medicine? Well, of course you don't. And actually, especially when I've helped graduates come into medicine, they've said, you know, I didn't want to come to do medicine. And then I started working and I changed my mind. And it's about how you frame it and the experiences and what's led you to this point. At some point in your life, you'll make a decision that you want to do medicine. And it's about verbalizing and articulating why you made that decision, what changed in your mind, and then what you've done about it. Because if you can kind of portray that story, it shows that you are insightful, it shows that you're driven, it shows that you wanted to do your research, it shows that you're clever enough to do it and that you're academic and sociable enough to do it. You've got work experience and voluntary work, so you value your time and you know you give your time freely. It's about capturing all of these things. Okay. In terms of how you write it, I think there's two sides to it. And I speak to people sometimes who get lots of feedback on their personal statement, but from family and friends, and other people who could never show their personal statement to family and friends. And that will be unique to everyone. I think you need a mixture of both. Personally, you want the family and friends to read through it and know that it sells you as you, because they know who you are as a person. But also you want people who are going to be much more critical, who don't know you and don't have that emotional attachment to say, you need to change this, you need to change that. But it's a real way to sell any experiences that you've had that you can't capture anywhere else in your application. You can put your grades on your application. You can put lots of other information, but you can't put your work experience down. You can't put all these other things that you've done to prove that you want to be a doctor, all the research you've done, all the reading you've done, all these things that kind of make you the best applicant possible. And then hopefully, if it all goes to plan, you'll get an interview. So the interviews are changing a lot. And years ago, they were pretty much all panel interviews. Whereas these days, they're moving to much more multiple mini interviews where you've got these lots of separate stations. So Sharon will talk you through each one basically and tell you what you need to know about the different types.
So there's different types of interviews, and Travis mentioned, and we've both had exposure to different ones. So Travis, interviewing for Imperial, has done a lot of multiple mini interviews. I've also done some interviewing for Durham University, where it was more of a traditional panel, a bit more similar to the Cambridge style interviews. Essentially, the interview is the one thing that really helps differentiate you. So it's almost the final hurdle. And most universities, if you've got to interview, that's where you need to seal the space. So just to give you a rough number, for example, to help narrow it down in your mind, Newcastle, one of the years, had about 3,000 applications. From those 3,000 applications, they then filter straight through the GCSE and the A-level requirements. So it's almost saying, have you got the predicted grades for GCSEs and the A-levels? And that's a minimum. So you should know that before you apply. And that's where we'll make sure for every candidate who's with us that you just don't apply to those universities where you know you're not going to meet the requirements. And again, that's why we say it's very important that you've sat the UCAT as early as possible, so you've got that score and you can actually be quite strategic in where you've applied. And both me and Travis, we've done this for our own application as well, because you want to be sure that you're applying to universities where you've got a high chance of getting in. So back to the numbers. So Newcastle, 3,000 applicants. Usually they interview about 1,000. The way they choose those 1,000 applicants.
Oh, I think we might have lost Sharon there. I think Sharon's just dropped out there. Can people still hear me in the chat before I carry on whittering on? Yeah, good. Okay, cool. So I think Sharon's internet's just dropped there, but everything he was saying was right. So, you know, your numbers drop massively when you get an interview. You know, you go from being one of 3,000 to one of sometimes 300. And the amount of offers you get compared to the amount of interviews they offer, like you say, you can really seal the deal at interview. And it really is a massive step forward in this hurdle of a process that you've been going through. So as I said, the old school panel interviews, they have their benefits. You get to build up a real rapport. But what they found is that if you were nervous and something went wrong in the beginning, that kind of skewed the appearance of your whole interview. Whereas the multiple mini interviews, they allow you to have 6, 7, 8, 9 separate encounters. And so everybody judges you on that one encounter. They don't know how the other 8 went. And this is really interesting because I think what it actually does is it prepares you for your OSCEs. Because when you do your OSCEs at medical school, you effectively do exactly the same thing. You walk in and out of different doors and you do different scenarios, and nobody knows how the last one went. And that can be really powerful for you if you're prepared. As long as you can get over those nerves as when you walk in the door, you actually then get 8 different chances to impress someone. And if a station you think goes horrendously badly, which I'm sure it won't, you know that you can just basically ace the other 7, and then that will average out your score. So typical stations you'll get, as I'm sure some of you have seen, you get basically proving why you want to be here, why do you want to study medicine, all the normal qualities of a doctor and dedication to medicine, your work experience and things like that. But what MMI has really allowed it to do is to change the way that they interview. They can bring actors in now. Previously, you couldn't bring an actor in to do a 5-minute section of a 30-minute interview, but a 5-minute MMI with an actor is justifiable because then everybody else will do it. So you've got actors now, you've got ethical scenarios, they give you data analysis, there's teamwork exercises, there's some weird and wonderful ones. I know Sheffield last year did like a 20 questions one, where they would think of something and you had to ask 20 questions to figure out what it was, all yes or no questions. I've seen ones where you have to describe a picture that you can see to the examiner, and so that they can try and draw it and things like that. And they're all just basically kind of like the aptitude test. It's all ways of them assessing you, ultimately. Perfect. So I think I've somehow managed to kick Sharon out now, which is slightly awkward.
He's let me back in.
Oh, there we go.
So I'm back in. So perfect. Basically, as Travis mentioned, the mini multiple interview is very, very important. And I've mentioned the traditional interviews, but it's all about showing that you're better than the other candidates. And again, there's lots of different stuff that we go through. And this is a lot of the tutor that we do is focused on the interview, and it's to do with body language, non-verbal skills, and practice. And that's why if you look at our website as well, we're building up more blogs, so there'll be a lot more information on ethical scenarios, and on our Instagram page commonly we post stuff on there that is common interview stuff or hot topics, and that's all relevant for both personal statements and your interview. So what we're going to do now, we're just going to start off with some of the Q&As that we've had. Some of these are ones we've had submitted before, and others are ones that we've just will add in as we've got asked today. So I'll start off with the when should I start writing the personal statement? So common question and a very good question. So we think the personal statement is something you need to start working on in probably June to July time. Most people leave it until about mid-July. So most people start writing it sometime in July, but then what tends to happen is by the time you get back to college, you've not got much time to get it reviewed. People end up getting reviewed from the tutors in September, and before you know it, the 14th or 15th September, October comes up, and that's it. You've run out of time. And this is where we think it's important to start early. So a lot of the stuff where we've helped candidates get in is where you've written a draft early on, so early July, you've then modified it. And commonly what happens is people will sometimes write a draft and think that's a good draft, and then it will sit there for the next few weeks. And by the time you've got it to somebody who knows what they're doing, you've got it to an admissions tutor, or you've got it to somebody who's got experience of personal statements, it's too late to then change the structure, the layout, and the content. And that's why we'll be talking about this further in our personal statement webinar as well. But it's important that you've got that structure and layout early on. But we'd probably say early July is a good time to start thinking and start drafting something up.
Perfect. So somebody was obviously having a look around the website. So when we launched the website, we put all the things that we were kind of offering before we started medic admissions, kind of the last 5 or 6 years. kind of together as packages. And one of the ones is on personal statements. So basically what we do, so every personal statement that gets submitted to us through one of the packages will get reviewed by a doctor. And I think that's the big difference that we always stress. We don't farm them out to medical students or people who are family and friends. And I mean, I've been at university before where you literally get text messages and WhatsApp messages saying, can somebody read a personal statement tonight for me? You wouldn't believe who you think you're putting them into and who actually reads them. So I think it's definitely something to consider. And then you get two people to look at it as well. So usually at the moment, it'll be Sharon and I. But the team is building. We've got Dev who's started now. We've got another chap called Tom who's interested in starting. We've got lots of doctors who are coming on board. So you'll always have reviews by doctors and they'll go through it line by line and just say what they think is good, what they think is bad. And also overall structures and information. They break down all the statistics of have you got enough words or too many words, what's the grammar like, and basically read it through for you as kind of a one-off review. So if you think you're towards the end and you're happy with where you are, you just kind of want somebody to check it over who's not family and friends and things like that, then that's what that's there for. And then if you want somebody to actually work through it with you, that's when the kind of the develop and the analyze packages come in, where we'll kind of go through your personal statement with you and make sure that everything that you've written is okay, any changes we could make, that sort of thing. And then finally, the other thing we do is an express service. So if it is the 13th of October and you just want a last minute look at it before you submit it, that's there as well.
So the next question we had is, when should UCAT preparation start? So for those of you who've never done the UCAT, we advise at least 6 to 8 weeks. The reason being, some of the questions and the question styles are things that you will never have come across. So for example, abstract reasoning, where you're having to do pattern recognition, you're having to look at different shapes, different styles, and different techniques. You want to be confident in using those techniques. And we will talk through these different techniques in our webinar, which is coming up, and we'll give you details about that. But essentially, you want to be able to focus at least 1 to 2 weeks on perfecting your technique. And we have a strategy where it's, okay, these are methods that you can use. These are proven methods that our students have used in the past for each section to try and strengthen your score. And then what you want to do, you want to be able to do lots and lots of questions from lots of different resources, particularly the question banks on the UCAT website. And that's where you want to really push that score up and develop those techniques. If actually you've never done the UCAT before, it's probably better to even start before 8 weeks. And commonly, some of the highest scoring candidates that we've come across, they tend to start around about July time. But again, registration for the UCAT will be opening, and they have confirmed that it will be the online version this year, but there will also be a test center version. But there's the use of artificial intelligence, which will be interesting. We're not sure, but they'll somehow probably get a lock screen or be able to monitor via a camera what you're doing. But so it's important that you score highly. And the other thing which we definitely add on to the UCAT preparation start question is about making sure that you've got that score before you've applied. And that's why the table which we showed you earlier, which Travis showed, is that's got the averages for each section. But actually, even if your average is 700, you might have scored below 500 in one section. And instantly, despite having that average, that will mean that you kicked out the application process by university and you won't be selected for interview. So it's important that you've got those averages in each different section.
And just on the subject of UCAT, somebody asked me, can you start too early? And I think that's kind of a bit of a personal question, because you can't and you can. It depends how you revise for exams, and you'll know that yourself, because what I have seen in the past is burnout. So I've had parents and students approach me like a year before thinking, shall I start preparing for the UCAT? And actually, the answer is normally no. Some familiarity is great, but if you start really hard 12 months before, you'll probably, by the time you get to the exam, going to be a bit burnt out, which is why I think, like Sharon was saying, 2 to 3 months for some familiarity, and then 6 weeks before really going in, knowing that you've got the time to do it, I think is really important. So similarly, we were saying about, do you need to sit the BMAT? I think we've kind of answered that one in the sense of normally there would be 2 sittings, and you could do 1 sitting before you apply. This year, we've only got the November sitting, so it would mean you'll have applied before you sit the exam. What's the hardest, so I'll go on to what's the hardest interview question you've ever had. I think lots of interview questions depend on how they're phrased. Certainly some of the clinical scenarios I've seen are quite difficult. Last year at Imperial, we asked people how you deal with stress. very straightforward, simple question. People said they like to read, they like to play sports, they like to play musical instruments, they've got lots of hobbies, they've got a good support network around them, some really good answers. And then we follow that up with going, great, it's 4 a.m., you're in the middle of A&E, now how do you deal with stress? Somebody's just shouted at you, a patient screaming at you, there's a patient who needs you over there. Now how do you deal with the stress? Because you now can't go and read, play an instrument, go and play football, talk to your mum. You know, all of these options are gone. Now, how do you deal with stress? And that really threw lots of people because they had this very rehearsed answer in their head of how they were going to deal with stress. But then none of those things could work. And what we were looking for is just people saying, either I would do things like take a minute, take a breath, make sure I'm okay and present, or actually say, if I don't think I can cope in that moment, I would stop and I would take a step back and say, actually, I need to take 5 minutes, or I'm not able to deliver care to those patients. And therefore, I'm not, you know, the best doctor that I can be. So I think that was one of the hardest ones that I've seen, just because of the follow-up being so sudden and so difficult for people to think on their feet. What about you, Sharon?
So I think it's very interesting. So I think one of the ones I've had and I've asked many times is it's a gentle question at the start, which everyone has an answer prepared for, is why do you want to be a doctor? And again, most people, it's usually quite rehearsed, that it might be personalized, but it's difficult to score highly in that question because everyone's got a decent, well-rehearsed answer. However, the follow-up to that commonly, and we've been selective about who and when we ask that, but I have had candidates where we asked, so all the roles you've mentioned, many of them can be done by a nurse. Would you now consider a role in nursing? And you'd be surprised by some of the answers we have had. So I think, so that particular answer, that's what we focus on in a lot of the work we do with candidates, is about being able to understand the role of health professionals around you. So for example, some answers have been, well, I'd be a nurse if I knew they could prescribe. And that's a valid comment. And there are nurses who can prescribe. But just because somebody didn't know that they prescribed, they've now then said in the interview they'd consider being a nurse when they're doing an interview for medicine. And I think that was quite a tricky one, and it has thrown a lot of people off. But again, I think it's about being well rehearsed and having done a lot of different questions. And that's what we focus on in the interviews, is making sure that you've come across a lot of different questions and you're confident in having a structure that you can talk through if you get that interview question. And the question that everyone asks is, will I get in? And that's why we're here. So we want as many people as can to get in. And that's why I think the biggest and the best thing you can do is be prepared. What commonly happens, and you've already taken this step, everyone watching this webinar who signed up, you're nice and early on the stage. Even if you're at the stage where you've already applied or you've got closer, you've gained probably a bit of extra information, hopefully. And about getting in, we want to make sure that your application is as strong as it can be, and you can essentially try and ace every single section that you've still not done. So UCAT, for example, we want to make sure that you're prepared for that. If you're doing the BMAT, we want to make sure you score highly in that. The personal statement, the interview. And it's about having somebody who's got the understanding and the experience in those different categories. We can't guarantee that you'll get in. However, what we can guarantee is that we'll try our utmost best through the services we've got to make sure that we're giving you the best information, the best experience that we've had. And as doctors, we've been through this process. We know many others who've coached through this process. And it's about being able to share that expertise with you. And that's why we offer quite a lot of different services. I've actually lost all the questions, so I was actually kicked out the webinar. But one of the one I remember was when's the BMAT test. I think I answered that. I think it's 17th of November. It does tell you when the test and the actual date will be. I can't actually see the answer that I wrote to somebody, but here it is. So it's on the 4th of November 2020 is when the November test date is for BMAT. And the test results are released direct to the university on the 27th of November. So that was the other question that was asked privately. I'll hand over back to Travis and the others.
Yeah, so just going back, there was one question that I didn't manage to type an answer to, which was how would you structure your studying for UCAT? And I really wanted to touch on this because I think it's really, really important that you don't get bogged down in numbers. You'll look around with all the preparation resources and it'll be 1,250 UCAT questions, 2,500 questions, 100,000 UCAT questions. And I think what that sets you up to do is have this mindset of, if I can answer the 100,000 questions on Medify, I will get 900 in the UCAT or the UCAT. And that's not the case. I've literally had people do every question on Medify and all the questions from the ISC medical book and everything else. And they don't actually do as well as they think they will. What's really important is not the number of questions you're doing. It is important to get a good number of questions under your belt. But what's more important is that you look at why you're getting them wrong. And a lot of our coaching is around why you get questions wrong and actually what we can do to make sure you don't get that question wrong again. Because there's no point getting 800 out of 1,000 right, but then not knowing why you got those 200 wrong. And so that's why I think in terms of how to structure it, I would always aim to look at doing it like a mock exam. So don't have a verbal reasoning day and then an abstract day. Get used to bouncing your brain between them all, because otherwise you might find on the day you can't quite bounce around them all like that. Okie dokie. And then just very quickly, because I can see that Sharon's answering something to somebody. Should you do the UCAT and BMAT, and should you prepare for them both together? I think it is beneficial where you can. At the end of the day, you can sit the UCAT a lot earlier this year than you can sit the BMAT. And so you do have this opportunity to prepare for one and then the other. But certainly some of the section 1 things in BMAT will help you with your UCAT and vice versa. And also there's always that worry that assuming that everything goes back to normal in September time, which at the moment we still don't know whether it will or won't, what people do, and it's the same with the UCAT, people push their dates back and back and back and back and back. They keep trying to do it later, and then they find that their A-levels start kicking in again, or other things in life start kicking in again. And actually the time that they allow isn't as much as they wanted to give it. And so some overlap is great, but make sure you've got time to revise for both. Perfect.
Just a question I was replying to, private question. So just somebody's asked me, have we got enough time to prepare for the UCAT if we start now? Definitely. So without doubt, we think you've got enough time. And actually, even if you've never done the UK CAT, you've never had a look at the structure, now's actually a good time to start preparing and start going through stuff. Because it's almost summer holidays for a lot of people. If you exams are usually out the way. I know this year, obviously, COVID pandemic has changed everything. But now is usually a time when a lot of candidates are free and start revising. And even if you've never done it before, you'd advise now is a good time to start. And again, we'll have a webinar starting next week, and Travis will be coming on to this, where we will be going through some techniques you can use. And we just had another question about, are interviews likely to be online / video? And if so, how do we prepare for them? So there is a very high chance, and from some medical schools that we have spoken to, they are saying that if the situation remains as such, they might actually have to focus less on certain things. So for example, the personal statement, a lot of students won't be able to get work experience. So there's other things we'll talk about in future webinars about where you can get virtual work experience. But where this might actually disadvantage certain people where you've not been able to gain that experience, in those cases, the importance and the emphasis will be on the interview. And that's why the interviews can possibly be online. And if they are online, we will be able to talk to them. And we have tutored people before via webinar quite commonly, where we talk about how you can improve your appearance, how you can improve your body language, and the structure used for interviews. But there is a decent chance that they could be online, particularly if we start to get further waves. But most of the interviews generally tend to occur after December. The majority of the interviews are somewhere between December and February time. So there is still plenty of time for that.
Excellent. And then, yeah, the last one I saw was, do you know any good free UCAT resources? And I'm going to use this as an opportunity to plug ourselves, because yes, I do. Wednesday, the 10th of June at, that will now be 7 o'clock, because we've had to push it back a little bit because of work. But at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, we are doing a UCAT webinar. So I will pop the link in the chat, because we want to make sure that people can ask questions and things. So you're not necessarily going to have everybody there. But you guys get first look at this. So on Wednesday, we're going to run through a quick hour overview of the UCAT, all the different sections, some tips and tricks of how to approach them, what they look like, and things like that. Just as a quick overview. Other things that are really good. So UCAT themselves publish 3 mock exams. And we'll talk a little bit on Wednesday about how to space those out. But otherwise, there are lots of free resources out there. Some of them are really good, but you have got to remember that they're free for a reason. And I think that's just worth bearing in mind. But we break down some of the books on Wednesday, some of the online resources and things that you can think about using. But I've just popped that link there if anybody wants to sign up for the UCAT webinar on Wednesday. Perfect. Does anybody have any other questions?
So I just had another private question about what the prices will be. So again, it used to be £100 when we did these courses in person. But if you look at the resources, we still have most of these costs. So if you look at the BMAT course, which is a full one-day course, and the UCAT course, which is a full one-day course, we've reduced that to £60. And from that, it's now been reduced to £50 with a £10 discount code. So we'll be giving this out in our next webinar as well. But for the UCAT course, there's a limited 25 places. The discount code is UCAT10 in capitals. And for the BMAT course, it's BMAT10 in capitals. Which is any other? Are there any other questions that we've got from anyone else? So brilliant. Thank you ever so much to everyone who's attended our first webinar. It's been great to have lots of different questions from you, and we really hope that you've enjoyed this webinar. We'll be posting a lot more resources online, so keep an eye on our website, keep an eye on our Instagram page. There'll be lots and lots of resources coming in. We're always happy to encourage applications for our bursaries. So there's a criteria for bursaries that we offer. You can have a look on our website about that. And then as time goes on, we will have more sessions coming up. But the ones to keep out for, as Travis has shown you the dates, is the UCAT webinar coming up next week. Then there's the BMAT one, and we will also have what's called a personal statement hackathon. And what we're going to be doing in there is we'll be doing a full-on day where we'll be looking at your personal statement. So we'll be doing, in the morning, it will be focusing on different techniques, structures, and layouts. And then we'll actually go through your individual personal statements as you draft them, and then follow those up within 7 days. Thank you so much for everyone who's come. And yes, adults can apply to these bursaries. Bursaries are open to every applicant. If you want to have a look at the exact criteria, you can go and have a look on the website. But we have already given out quite a few bursaries, and we will continue to do so. So definitely take a look. If there's any other questions you've got, feel free to message us anytime, and we'll be more than happy to try and respond to your queries. But thank you so much to everyone who's attended. Hope you have a nice evening and weekend.
Perfect. Excellent. Yeah, I was trying to say, just as a quick thing, I forgot to set the stock level high for the webinar. And so within the 2 minutes that I mentioned it, it's sold out. So I've just put the numbers back up again so that people can still sign up. But that was quicker than I was imagining it selling out. Yeah, thank you so much for coming and listening this evening. It's been great to meet you all. As I say, the idea of today was to meet some of you, give a bit of an overview, but also start to build up this community. The best thing that will come out of tonight is the fact that there are now 30, 35, 40, 50 of us who want to apply for medicine and who we can kind of work together with and give different ideas to, offer different things. And so if you know other people who you think would benefit from this sort of thing or who are interested in medicine, do let them know. At the moment, so we're on all social media, but at the moment we're kind of focusing on Instagram because that seems to be the place where most people are. We are going to be filming some videos and things in the future, but at the moment with COVID, it's very difficult to film videos, and the guy who normally films them for us lives away and we can't travel there and things. But feel free to either email us, drop us messages on Instagram. But the most important thing is that we can help you guys, get these applications and then in the future work with you. Because ultimately that's why we set up Medic Admissions, is because we want people who are dedicated to come and work with us as doctors. So thank you very much. As I say, any questions, let us know. If not, I hope to see you all on Wednesday for the UCAT webinar. Bye.